And as I said before, I'm Quintaris Thomas, Upper Trinity Regional Water District. So the Upper Trinity Regional Water District, we were established in 1989. Um, our whole purpose, like what we really try to ensure that we do, is to dependably deliver high quality water that's sustainable and efficient. And part of being efficient is making sure that we conserve water, making sure that we can be thoughtful and intentional with the water that we put down on our lawns and our landscapes. So, touching on the finer points of that, water conservation, watershed protection, that is what we're all about. Just making sure that the water flows where it's supposed to go, and then making sure that we can also provide it in a sustainable and efficient way. And also making sure that these things are at the forefront of the decision making and the behaviors that our customers have. So that's what I've been doing out in the field as of recently. So DIY sprinkler system repairs. These are simple fixes that you can do as a homeowner because, as we know, when we call the sprinkler guy out and he does his repairs, it's going to cost us money that we don't want to spend. Sometimes we have to, but if we can avoid that, that would be super ideal, right? Well, let's unlock your potential as a homeowner and get you on the right track to those savings, to conserving that water, to doing all those things that we strive to do as homeowners. So, question for y'all. Do you think that sprinkler repairs are too complex to handle on your own? Well, we're going to dive into that just a little bit today. So, I wanted to just tell you that you can fix a lot more than what you think. Having experience in the irrigation field, I've really been able to reverse engineer this whole process and just really lean into some of the simpler things that would make a huge impact on your landscape, huge impact on your water conservation and your bill that you pay. And that's what we're all trying to reduce if we can. So some of the reasons why you'd want to be comfortable with the simple repairs are the fact that you're going to reduce your waste, you're going to lower your water bill, prevent landscape damage, and increase the lifespan of your system. So when you reduce your water waste, by default, it's going to lower disease. It's going to make sure that those pathogens, those fungal guys that like to come in and cause all these weird spots in our yard that we think is underwatering that makes us water more a lot of the times, we can avoid that, just by reducing wasting that water. So on top of that, you're going to be simultaneously lowering your water bill, making sure that you don't have to pay as much on that water bill, and that's self-explanatory. The lifespan of your system, it kind of goes without saying, if you are making sure that you're maintaining your system from a very basic level, you can prevent major things from happening to where it would just cause you to have to essentially have a new system via repairs. Because after you get so many repairs done, you're pretty much dealing with a brand new irrigation system. And, let's try to maintain what we have, right? So that being said, the more you know, the better. So we're going to get into some of the common sprinkler system issues that, we kind of deal with on a regular basis in our landscapes and everything. So there's plenty of these to go around, but we're going to make sure that we stick with what we specifically deal with as homeowners, or what we can specifically impact as homeowners with what we deal with. So a few of the things are broken sprinkler heads. We we know those also well. The lawn mowers they love sprinkler heads, so we deal with that a lot. You know, and we have clogged nozzles. We'll run into those in the field where it'll be just droplets of water coming out when it's supposed to be a constant stream or constant arc of water coming from your spray heads, or even those or even those rotors that we have. So low water pressure, oftentimes a problem with a pipe break in your system, or even the valve not operating as it's supposed to. Uneven water distribution, meaning that, we oftentimes will be watering concrete when we shouldn't be looking to water concrete. We want to water our turf and make sure that that soil is being infiltrated by that water so that we can have, that saturation that we look for inside of our soils and inside of our landscapes. Another thing is drip breaks. Those are probably the most common thing that you're going to deal with when you're dealing with sprinkler repairs in your landscape, because quite simply, critters love water inside the drip, and the drip is also very high on the surface usually. So when we go playing around in the dirt and everything like that, we end up breaking that first before we break anything else on those parkways and those flower beds. So, and last but not least, we have controller malfunction, and that's going to be things that you deal with in regards to electronical issues with your controller. It might be programming errors, all kinds of things that could just be tied into the controller itself. So let's go over some sprinkler terminology. So, my bad. Let's go over some sprinkler terminology. So, first of all, let's start with the top, because that's what we see in the field most of the times when we're dealing with sprinkler heads or spray heads specifically, because this is a spray head. So the top part of the spray head is the nozzle. It comes with a filter, and you can screw these into the head body itself, and that screws into what you see right below it is the riser. It has a thread pattern that matches that specific nozzle. Sometimes you'll have a female nozzle, and then sometimes you'll have a male nozzle, depending on the brand of head you have. Your Hunter, your Rainbird heads, they're going to have your common just screw on female nozzle that you can deal with as far as that goes. So let's talk about when these are broken. So we have broken sprinkler heads, and there's specifically two different sprinkler head bodies that you're going to encounter in your landscape. So first of all, we're going to go over a little bit of the sprinkler that you just saw, which is the spray head. They're going to spray in a fixed pattern most of the time. You have MP rotators, which are going to make it technical, but in 95% of the situations, you're going to have a fixed patterns like nozzle on that spray head. It can be changed and it can be adjusted based on the situational need. A lot of the times in your parkways, you'll see heads in the parkways if your house is built before a certain period of time. But now in the parkways, there's drip typically. But within those parkways, it's oftentimes that those are odd shapes, and we are going to water concrete when we're watering our parkways, which is why they switched it over to drip. But, a lot of times in our landscape, we have these odd areas and just oblong shapes that we're trying to water, and the spray heads kind of, they do it in an efficient way, or efficient enough way to make sure that you can get by with that. But there's a bunch of different types of spray head nozzles and types. So the next type that we're going to talk about is rotor heads. These are the sprinkler heads that rotate. If you're out on a golf course or you're in a big field and, there's a lot of area to water, even a big backyard, you're going to see these rotor heads, and they're going to be able to turn from 30 degrees all the way to 360 degrees. And within that adjustment, you can really get a lot of different coverage options, because even the nozzles themselves, when you get one rotor head, it comes with a tree of nozzles that has a bunch of different spray patterns that can accommodate for any particular area that you would be dealing with. So typically for a simple break on a spray head, you can kind of either change a nozzle or screw the head out of the ground and insert a new one. The spray heads are the simplest things to fix if there's not a piece of pipe that's broken underneath them. Even with that, the riser itself underneath the head is easily fixable too, and we'll get to that later. But right now, just know that changing those sprinkler heads is about the easiest thing that you can do on your system if you're willing to do just a little bit of digging sometimes. And sometimes you don't even have to really, and sometimes to that point, you don't even have to dig, because if the head is ground level and you just move the dirt around the top of it, you can just take a pair of channel locks and you can thread the head directly out of the ground without having to dig it out. And that's oftentimes a really good way to minimally invasive get into the spot, or be minimally invasive getting to the spot so that you can actually change the head out. And so for rotors, you usually want to have with the rotors, you want to replace the whole head. If there's a broken piece on the head for the rotor, typically you're going to have to just replace the whole thing, because those bodies there's a lot less parts to them when it comes to actually fixing the head itself. And that's really what it is with those rotors. So first thing we're going to talk about today is clogged nozzles inside of those spray heads. When dealing with clogged nozzles, it's always good to have a pair of grippers. Here are the grippers. So as you can see on the top of the grippers, they have a kind of flared out, oval shape to where you can just grab the nozzle while it's in the ground. And it even has like a point on the very tip. You can't really see it on the slide, but it comes to a point to where when you open those grippers, you can actually grab the top of the spray head and pull it up, because if you don't have those, you got to use your fingernails to kind of dig into the head and kind of pull it up yourself. So it's always good to have these grippers when you're dealing with changing those clogged nozzles out. And once you pull up the nozzle, you can clean it, you can replace it, you can change the filter, and there's an example of a picture of someone using grippers in the field to actually change those nozzles out. So another thing about those grippers is the fact that you can actually keep that head held up while you're doing that nozzle change and changing out that filter or whatever you're doing for that head. And it's a really effective tool for that exact purpose. So next up, we have like low water pressure. So with low water pressure, um, there's a few things to consider. So a leak on the riser is a lot of times what you're going to be dealing with the water pressure being reduced. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. And like the riser piece that's broken off into the head right here. Let me see. Yes. So that is a riser that's broken off into the head. You'd have to use a special tool to get that out, but these are all things we're going to touch on. But that's what it looks like. And you're also going to deal with a leak on the piping associated with that zone. And when you have that kind of a fix, you might be looking at calling someone unless you're going to get a little bit more complex, because we're not going to be talking about that type of repair today. But I just wanted to identify that as being a potential thing that can happen for that zone in relation to the low water pressure. So the riser, really, really easy to fix. Just have to have a special tool for it. You want to use a de-threader tool. So the de-threader tool is really a simple tool, and I'm going to go right to that here. You have a piece that you can essentially de-thread a 3/4 inch nozzle. That's the one on the right. So you have the tool that goes up and down, and then the section to the right of it that can thread into the tool can thread out 3/4 inch pipe or 3/4 inch risers. And then to the left of the tool on that same frame, you can take that and thread it into the tool, and you can get the 1/2 inch risers out. For this particular spray head that you see, any spray head that you see is going to take a 1/2 inch thread tool to get that piece out of the head. And the way you do that is you jam it into the head, and it has a reverse star pattern. So when you go to backwards thread it, it just grabs the riser and just pulls it right on out. So you can still salvage that head if the head itself is not broken, but just the riser. So, and when you take the riser out, if you have both the broken pieces, you can kind of put them together and see how long that riser was. But if you don't, you want to just make sure that you put a riser back into the head that's going to ensure that that head is at ground level, so you don't have to worry about, it being too high or being too low and then creating another issue when you're trying to fix or solve an issue to begin with. So next thing we're going to talk about today is uneven water distribution. And this is a notorious problem that we have in our landscapes and everything. It doesn't have to be as big of a deal as what it kind of is, but it is. So we're going to talk about it. A lot of times in our landscape, there's areas that just aren't getting water when they should, or are getting way too much water when they shouldn't get that much water. So with spray heads, it can be as simple as changing a nozzle. And we talked about what those nozzles are. There's a bunch of different types of nozzles. And on top of that, there's even adjustable nozzles. They typically spray from a 4 to 6 to 8 to 12 to 15 to 18 foot arc or range from that nozzle. But you can also get an adjustable version of every single size of that nozzle, to where you can open the top of the nozzle and close the top, and it would, with that opening and closing, it would make the fan wider or shorter within that opening or closing. But those nozzles actually take up more water than, say, if you set it a quarter or set it at 90 degrees and you had a fixed head. That adjustable nozzle is going to take a little bit more water, but it's always a good way to kind of hit those weird areas. Here's a picture of the nozzle and the filter. We kind of looked at it before, but here's a precise picture of it with just focusing on that filter and that nozzle itself. With the spray heads, if you change the nozzle out, a lot of the times that's what's going to be the problem with the spray heads, unless the riser on the head itself is broken. And we talked about that a little bit earlier when we were talking about the parts of the head. So sometimes the head needs to be moved. And with that, that's a situation where you may just have to call someone. But the thing about it is, sometimes, you can just have flex pipe and you can just move it from the area it's at. I don't want to talk about that too much because that's kind of getting into more of the advanced stuff, but just know that there's flex pipe and there are tools that you can thread into the head that you can move the head in relation to the length of that flex pipe that's in the ground. You're going to have to do a little bit more digging for that, but like I said, don't want to elaborate too much because we don't want to get off in the weeds. With rotors, the spray arc can be adjusted with the proper tool. And we're going to go over what that tool is. Sometimes it's going to be a flathead screwdriver, and sometimes it's going to be an Allen wrench, depending on what type of head you have. Now, for the Rainbird heads, you're going to use the Rainbird screwdriver, and you're going to be able to adjust the fanning of the head. So when the head shoots a stream out, you can then make that stream go shorter and wider with that screwdriver. You can also adjust the 30 to 360 degree angle of the head that we discussed initially. One more thing that you can do with that screwdriver is I'm sorry, that's the only two things you can do, but that's all you really need to do with that screwdriver. The other thing that screwdriver can be used for is actually pulling the top of the head up while the head is not running so that you can then grab it, or you can put a clip on it and you can work on it from that angle. So let me take that back 1 second, but these can also be removed as a last resort. These typically are going to have a 3/4 inch thread underneath the bottom of them, whereas to the spray head is going to have a 1/2 inch thread underneath the bottom of it. So next thing we'll talk about is controller malfunction. So we talked about smart controllers, and typically, you're going to have controller malfunctions with the more technology that you have. The more analog that the controllers are, the longer they tend to last. But as we increase our technology within these controllers, we are dealing with a lot more controller malfunctions. So these are some things we got to look at. So let's look at it. These are a few of the different types of controllers that you'd see in the field. The black one that you see is known as a ratio, and that's a smart controller. So that controller, it's controlled by your cell phone. You have all the input wires that you'd normally have, but it has a Wi-Fi signal that sends to the router of your house that then can allow you to connect from your phone. Even though it connects from the router, it has a home-based setting to where it connects to the router. So you can be anywhere in the world with these smart controllers, and you can see the status of your system depending on what kind of sensors you have on it. And you can also control your system through the phone with these smart controllers. It's just a really cool piece of technology that allows you to be a little bit more adaptive with the scheduling and the programming of your system and lets you sleep a little bit better at night. And sometimes the smart controllers actually tell you faults or tell you what's going on with the system itself as a notification message. So they are really nice because one more thing they do, they tap into the ET system, meaning that they tap into the weather system and allow you to have adjusted watering based off of its quote unquote brain, So other one we have here is the Rainbird. That's to the right here. That's the regular ESP TM2. You can have Wi-Fi on that controller, but the Wi-Fi module is sold separately, and it's called the LNK2 module. We just did a project actually where we were installing a bunch of those. So that's something that, is really helpful for making that controller Wi-Fi based. But an advantage of having that controller and having the LNK module is you can still control it from the faceplate and see all of the settings from the faceplate. Whereas to the Ratio, you can still control it from the faceplate, but you just can't see the settings unless you're in the app. Last but not least, on the bottom left here, we have the Hunter Pro C. That controller it has Wi-Fi capabilities, but it is the first generation of that particular thing. Typically, you're going to be using this controller specifically in a manual way. Obviously, you can program and schedule your zones to run, but you can then test this a lot easier, and it's the traditional or typical controller, just to give a rundown of those. So sprinkler system controllers all function the same way, but it can be difficult troubleshooting different types of controllers based off of, what's going on with that controller. Because as I just said, the technology is going to make layers and layers of troubleshooting that you may not have to do with other controllers. A few common issues that you're going to run into with controllers are, programming errors. So this isn't necessarily a malfunction. It's just a matter of correcting the timing. And that's what I do when I go out and help people with irrigation checkups. I'll go through the system, get the gallons per minute that the sprinklers are running on each zone, and then I will make my recommended changes with the client. And if they're okay with it, we then go about changing those times and get them to where they can conserve water. And I'm going to tell you right now, there has not been one person that has not been okay with me saving them some money watering while making sure that their lawn is also getting the adequate amount of water that we need to have put down. So power failures. With the controllers, it is pivotal, and I'm going to make a point to say how pivotal this is right now for you to have a power strip with whatever outlet that you have these controllers plugged into, because with all the storms, with all the rain, with all these events that we have in Texas, one of the things that I find the most in the field is actually fried controllers, because they connected them directly to the plug. They're like, oh, I have a GFCI outlet. I don't have to worry about that. No, always get the power strip. It's going to save you some heartache when it comes to, electrical issues with the controller. But sometimes the controller's battery, sometimes the controller's power can just fail as a result of it failing, manufacturer issue, whatnot. But a lot of these controllers have backup memory, so you can easily get that information for the programming and transfer it to the new controller, or even have it in your phone. The Rainbird ESP-TM2, when you install the L&K Wi-Fi module, it actually backs up the controller for you it sends you an email with that programming in it. So if you ever have to change it, it doesn't have to become an issue. So display issues is the last issue you're going to typically deal with the controller malfunctions. And this is going to look crazy. The controller very well could work, very well could have functionality, very well could be doing all the things that we want the controller to do. But the display, if it's not displaying and it's meant to be a display-based controller, you can see how that would be an issue, which would elicit you replacing that controller. And honestly, with the display issues with the newer controllers, you don't run into that nearly as much as the older controllers that would be in the field. And typically this has to do with the fact that they're just older. It's time for them to actually not be in that spot anymore, or to be replaced with a different controller, preferably a smart controller, so you can have a little bit more control over your watering. So essential tools and supplies. Let's go over some basic tools so we can get you ready to do these simple repairs that we're talking about right now. So the basic tools that are needed are, so you have a screwdriver, pliers, and a shovel. We're going to go ahead and just show all those right now. So we have our screwdriver, our pliers, and a shovel. There's different types of pliers, and they all come in handy in different situations. Your needle nose pliers, sometimes if you don't have the gripper tool, it's really good to be able to grip the top of the spray head to pull it up with the needle nose. With your lock grip pliers, you can sometimes thread screws that you may not have the right, wrench for. The screwdrivers, you can access the top of the spray head to actually, that's one thing I didn't mention about the spray heads. You can actually, there's a screw on top of the nozzle that you can screw down to bring down the volume of water, or you can open this screw up and it would open up the volume of water through it as well. And these are just tools that you can use to elicit those activities. The shovel, it's pretty much self-explanatory, but to talk on it just a little bit, we use that to dig in the ground. So replacement parts that are needed are sprinkler heads, nozzles, and dethreaders. With these three things, you can just about repair any non-pipe related break in your system. And that should be empowering, because with those three simple tools, you can do so much. The cleaning supplies needed are filters, filter screens, and something to clear clogged nozzles. So the filter screens are just what I was showing you with the nozzles before. It was sitting right beside that nozzle when I showed that specifically. And you just need a stream of water. You just need something to run water over the filter to clean it, or to clean the nozzle itself. And then you can also use a needle or of some sort, like a paper clip, to actually get the small particulates out of the nozzle if you want to make that nozzle last for as long as it can. So the quick fix number one is replacing a broken sprinkler head. So that's what we've all been kind of waiting for, right? So step one is to identify the damaged head. So when you're in the field and you see a head doing this, you know that it is broken. It could be spraying in all kinds of different patterns. It could be slightly deviated from the original pattern, but nonetheless, that nozzle itself or that spray head is broken, or that sprinkler head. So step two, you're going to unscrew and remove the old head. So sometimes when you go to unscrew the head, it does that and it breaks off the riser. And we talked about what we need to actually get that piece out of the head, out of the bottom of it. And sometimes when you screw it out, the riser comes out as a whole piece. So we're going to see that with the next one here. So step three is to clean the threads and attach the new sprinkler head. So here's an example of what it looks like in the ground. Obviously, it's not floating. There's not a space in between the head and the riser, but that's a really good picture to kind of just show you what you're trying to accomplish with that head and riser combo. You want to take that dethreader tool, get the old riser out, and then you can just thread the new riser into the bottom of the head And typically there's going to be a hole in the ground where you pulled the head out of the ground unless you dug and it got all crumbly and stuff. And you can just put the head straight back into the same spot. And that's going to really put you in a good spot as far as the head just being fixed. So next up, step 4 is adjust for proper water coverage. You want to, if the spray head is a fixed spray head, you still have to make sure that it's spraying in the right direction, right? If it's in the corner of 2 sidewalks, you want to make sure that it's right in the middle of it, spraying along those turf edges and not hitting that concrete, or hitting that concrete as minimally as possible, because we know we can't be perfect, but we're striving to try to get as best coverage as we can with these sprinkler heads and these spray heads. And that's what it looks like, when it's operating properly and it's in the spot it's supposed to be in. It's going to have a nice, constant, consistent, and even stream that broadcasts in a way that's going to make sure that your grass is growing. So that's a good. So next thing we have is unclogging a nozzle. So the first thing that we want to do when we unclog a nozzle is remove the nozzle from the sprinkler head. And here's that picture that we saw before, just touching back on it so that you can have a little bit more familiarity on it. You want to screw that out of the top of the head, and it is just your standard righty-tighty, lefty-loosey screw pattern with that particular nozzle. So next thing you want to do is rinse it thoroughly with water. Just like you could take it to an outside water hose spigot, and you can just run water through it. And a lot of times that's going to actually clear out whatever it is that you're dealing with in the head. And then if you want to take it a step further, you can then use a small pin or needle to clear the particles from the nozzle. And with these pictures right beside each other, you can kind of see how you would use that paperclip to clear out the entry point of the water there, because sometimes small pebbles or whatnot could be lodged in there and you can just clear it out. And sometimes it's just, a conglomerate of pieces of sand or something like that that you can get out. But either way, it's pretty easy to unclog a nozzle. Step 4 is to just screw the head onto the new or clean screw on the new or clean nozzle to the head body itself. And once you do that, it should just spray as it's supposed to spray, because you've done everything you need to do to make sure that it's going to do just that. So quick fix number 3, we have drip repairs. And this is one that is so simple, but there's a few different things that goes into it. So let's touch on those things. When dealing with a drip break, the leak could be small, but it really does add up, because drip, let's just think about it for a second. Drip is measured in gallons per hour. It is not measured in gallons per minute. So when you have a puncture wound inside the drip, it is now going to leak predominantly, or it's going to flow predominantly in that spot, and it's going to not be gallons per hour anymore. It still will be, but it's now watering or pushing water out at the rate that a spray head or a rotor would. And drip is supposed to be efficient. Drip is supposed to be a very, good way of distributing water without losing your water to structures and things like that. So we want to make sure that the drip is not spraying and potentially hitting fence, sidewalk, and all kinds of stuff like that. So here's what it looks like when you have a drip break. It could look like that. It could be completely severed and just flowing water out of one side of it. Or, it could be a small puncture wound that just missed, and that just exudes mist, but you could barely see it unless you get right up on it. So it's good to inspect your drip zones pretty thoroughly when you're looking at your inspections and everything like that, to make sure you don't have a small leak that could be causing you problems, So it's the simplest thing to repair in most cases on the landscape. And believe it or not, if properly installed, drip is the most efficient way of the irrigation methods. And some people will call me biased because I sit there and talk about drip constantly, but I really do believe in it because I use it and it works well. So we're just going to elaborate more on the drip repairs. So this is another example of a break in the drip. Like I was saying, this one's more completely severed. You're going to have water gushing out of one side of it, and it's going to just put out tons of water unnecessarily. So step 1 is to cut a clean section out of the damaged drip. So that's what that would look like. The exact picture that's above the second picture that just came up, once you cut that and it's severed, it's going to look just like what you see on the bottom here. And if the break is just a slit in the pipe, you can typically get by without even, cutting a section of the pipe out, just cutting that the rest of the way. And if there's flexibility on the pipe, but there's a bigger cut on it, you can sometimes pull the drip just a little bit, but you don't want to pull it too much because that messes with the pattern. But you take a clean cut section out of the drip, you have a barb there, and then you push both ends of the drip line onto the coupling barbs. So you see how it has somewhat of a fishhook effect there. Once you push those barbs into the drip, it's going to be able to hold that drip while being pressurized. And this is what it's going to look like before you push that barb on. You know, you got the barbs in place, and then you go for the push, and you're like, and it gets to here. So you want to, like on step 3, you're making sure that both the barbs are secure on both ends of the pipe. And as you can see on this picture here, you know, the barbs that were on the third picture showing are now inside of the pipe, snug and ready to go. Obviously, you're not going to have 2 open ends on the side, but I just wanted to show it to you in that perspective so you can have an understanding of what you're looking at with it. So this is one more thing with the drip. So I mentioned that, you know, if you have a bigger space and you can't pull that pipe and you don't have any flexibility and you need to get that section repaired, this is pivotal that you know this. So you're going to just take 2 couplings here with a piece that's already put together, and you're going to fill that gap in with that double couplinged piece of drip that's going to give you continuation through that drip, so you don't have to worry about it spewing out everywhere, and that leak is then taken care of. So step 3 is to just attach the new couplings with attach the section with the couplings into the drip line. So that's what it's going to look like. It looks just like the other picture we saw, but it's just 2 couplings as opposed to 1, because we're compensating for the gap that was not on the other one. So let's talk about rotor composition. This is, we're not going to talk about every piece that you see on this picture. I want to preemptively tell you that, but a standard rotor head has a little more that goes into it than a spray head. So here that is. So like I said, we're not going to go over every piece, but needless to say, this needs to be said. The nozzle is right. That blue piece on the very tip of the head, it says interchangeable color-coded rain curtain nozzles on it. This piece is the only piece that you're going to add to the head outside of the bottom riser itself. Typically, the head, you're going to just throw that nozzle into it, and it takes a little force, and you're going to have that head extended when you do it. But once you get that in there, that screwdriver that's on top of it is what I was talking about with the fan piece. So if you screw that piece down, it fans the distribution of the spray out. And if you screw it back up, it just sprays a straight stream of water out of that nozzle. You can see inside of it, it has the filter built into it, has like gear mechanisms and all that good stuff. And it has a pressure activated wiper seal, which means that it only flows when a certain amount of pressure goes through it. And yeah, because you don't want these guys flowing with minimal pressure. So that being said, that's the rotor and that's the composition. It's gear driven. So that increases the complexity by far. You know, it's going to just it's going to make things way more complicated. So you can buy these heads pre-assembled, and that literally makes you avoid that whole headache that I was talking about. But, you know, it's good to know what the pieces are so that just in case you wanted to go to an irrigation supply house and build your heads all custom, you could do that. But as I said, it comes pre-assembled. You can go to any box store and get these heads pre-assembled. If it's broken underneath, replacing the riser is way simpler. You know, that is just like replacing the riser on the bottom of a spray head, but you're just going to use the 3/4 inch star pattern that I was talking about as opposed to the 1/2 inch star pattern. And you can always refer back to the earlier point in the slideshow to see that dethreader tool. So we're going to talk a little bit now about adjusting the water distribution. So when you're adjusting the water distribution, so you got to keep in mind that the wind is currently blowing at whatever time of day that you're going to be working on it. Typically, the wind dies down here in Texas in the wee hours of the night. So when you're working on these systems during the daytime, just be subtly thinking about the direction of the wind, how it's going to impact the turf. And just because you see, you know, water droplets hitting the concrete, when the wind's not blowing, it could very precisely be watering the edge of the turf. So you want to take that into consideration when you're adjusting the water distribution on the head. But let's go into the steps. So step 1, you want to locate the adjustment screw on the sprinkler head. And I talked about this briefly when we were discussing the tools that you need, but you can take this screwdriver. I mean, it kind of looks like a flathead, but typically it's going to be a Phillip head screwdriver pattern on top of the spray head. And when you screw that tighter, the stream that you see coming out of that spray head is going to be reduced. And then when you screw it looser, it's going to have more of a free flow within the whole scheme of things. So I just went over step 2, but you turn the screw clockwise to reduce water flow, and then you like screw it counterclockwise to increase it. Step 3 is to just ensure that all the areas of your lawn are receiving adequate water. You'll usually do this part while the heads are running. So you might want to throw on some rain boots, throw on some water resistant clothing, and just get in there and get after it, because you're going to be in the stream of broadcast while you're doing this, because that's about the only way that you can really adjust it on a very precise level or accurate level. And that's what it's going to look like. So you can also take the head itself and you can, while it's running, turn it completely. It takes a little bit of strength, but you're not going to break the head by turning the actual top piece of the head. You're just going to, move it a little bit to account for the spray distance that was originally there, because sometimes through ground movement, these nozzles can be screwed into a different direction and it can change the direction of the flow. So final tips for success, right? Let's kind of really just put this into a neat bow and share some things that will set you on the right path. So you always want to turn the water supply off before repairs. This is going to make sure that nothing crazy happens and you're just running around not knowing what to do because water's going everywhere and you have to call somebody at that point. Let's avoid all that and let's just make sure that the water is turned off before you do the repairs. So you want to keep spare parts on hand for quick fixes. And, what that looks like is just having some parts, these parts are not really representative of the quick fixes, but it's just a picture of parts that, you'll have. The parts that you'll be using, let's actually go back real quick. We'll go back and we'll look at the parts that we'll be using really fast. I did all these keyframes, but I'm just going to get to that part real quick because I really want y'all to see this real quick. So the parts that you'll be using are a nozzle, you'll have a riser, you'll have all those different pieces, but you have de-threader tools, you'll have your riser, and I just thought it was really pivotally important to go back over this stuff just briefly so that we can have an understanding of what we're looking at. Yep, so there's the tool for pulling up the head to change the nozzles out. But yes, I just wanted to go over those tools real quick and we can go back to the slide that we want to go to. Oh, I just learned that I could do this. So here we go. So going back to the final tips for success, you want to keep the spare parts on hand. You want to regularly inspect your irrigation system. So that means I'd say once every 3 months, you want to go out there, or even once a month, you want to go out there and just kind of generally look at your system. And that doesn't mean that you have to manually turn it on. You can just go out there when it's supposed to turn on and just make a show out of it. Follow the zones as they run, or, just kind of keep an eye on them as they're doing their thing. So don't hesitate to seek help for major repairs. I know that we have really framed this whole thing around you as a homeowner doing these repairs and you being empowered to be able to do these repairs, but sometimes you'll have stuff like that, where the pipe is just busted, and you can do that as well. And you can go on YouTube, look up videos on how to fix these things, but it gets a little bit more complicated. And when you see something like what you see in this picture right here that I just pulled up, you probably want to call someone. So in conclusion, when it's all said and done, you can do anything as a homeowner that a professional can do, but it all comes to how far you're willing to go with the whole process, because it's very Lego block-esque when it comes to fixing anything on your irrigation system. You can put it together, you can take it apart, you can understand it, and you can learn it just like anything else. So don't be so scared of it, but just make sure that you're practicing caution when you're doing these things. And there's also a lot you can do as a homeowner to effectively manage